Is your mic on?
Not yet.
Sorry, you don't have the mic.
You tell me when you're ready.
I'm ready, as long as Jeff's ready.
Jeff's ready. I open the study session of February 10th, 2025 at 6 p.m. And I will call, Councilmember Cole is absent. Do I have a motion to excuse her?
I make a motion to excuse Councilmember Cole.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Viteto and a second by, and a second by Councilmember
Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor
Bowman.
Bowman, and all in favor.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Okay. Study session business. Number 1, discussion funding package for Public Works Operations Facility. I call on City Administrator Jason Wilson and Chief Financial Officer Cassandra Raymond.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight is actually a very exciting night, and it's a major milestone on the path to building our new operations facility. This is something that's been in the works for well over 5 years, and it's been to council multiple times throughout the process. I will say large portion of this facility was designed back in 2021. And at that time, council saw that, the cost of the project was going to result in the general fund having to pay 49% of it. And at that time, council felt that, we didn't have the resources within the general fund to incur that ongoing debt service. So the decision was made back then to delay the project until we sold the Sumner Meadows Golf Course. And in line with the council policies, then use that one-time revenue to offset the general fund share of this building. So Cassandra's going to go through a presentation tonight. It's recycled slides from a presentation we gave you in December with a couple additional new ones. And really the second item on tonight's agenda is really a hand in glove with this first item. So there is a lot of overlap between the two. So I'll turn it over to Cassandra and she'll take it from here.
Thank you. So this evening, we are actually recycling and refreshing a presentation that was provided to council on December 9th of 2024. At that time, the focus of that presentation was executing the contract for the construction of the main portion, phase 3 of the operations facility. Tonight, it is much the same information. We are just changing the focus a little bit to finalizing the funding package that we've been discussing for the past some time. All right. Jeff, can you advance that for me? Thank you. So, a new operations facility. Our current operations facility was constructed in 2000, and it had a footprint of about 1.6 acres, and it accommodates 13 FTEs. Our projected staff in our operations by the end of 2026, so this biennium, is 37 FTEs. Our current operations facility is packed to the rafters. It is inadequate for staff. It is inadequate for meeting space. We've moved so much towards things electronically, such as, training, meetings, timesheets, things like that. And we don't even have the space to provide really necessary equipment for our staff to be able to do that and do that well. So you can see, these are some photos that you've seen before, our sign shop. We've got some very expensive printing equipment in there. It doubles as a mini kitchen with a fridge. We don't have a dedicated kind of break room for our staff. It doubles as meeting rooms, training rooms, whatever they need to do. And so it really is imperative that we work towards getting them a facility that meets their operational needs. Next slide, please. So we actually began this project. I started here in 2012. We were talking about it even then, but we really started feasibility study of this in 2017. So we've been at this for a little over 8 years now. That feasibility study and design went from 2017 through 2024 at a cost of approximately $4.1 million. In 2019, we began procuring the land for the operations facility, and that was about 3.9 million. That land was put together of multiple parcels that we really did a lot of study and was in an ideal location and provided the capacity that we needed for our new facility. All right. Phase one. Phase one was demo and preloading the site. So this is prepping the soil and it's really getting it ready for the building. This was completed in 2024 at a cost of about $3.9 million. This was funded by a bond anticipation note that was authorized by City Council. Phase two was our north parcel decant facility. So this is built on the parcel north of the main site. This is a decant facility for stormwater, as well as some other north parcel improvements that will benefit the entirety of the operations facility. This is well underway and is anticipated to complete construction in March. This also was a cost of $3.9 million. This had a mixed funding source. We were able to get a Public Works Trust Fund loan, which is a fabulous source of funding for cities. It offers a very low interest cost loan for a certain specific type of projects, and our decant facility was able to qualify for that. For the parts of that site improvement that are not specifically related to the decant facility and therefore not eligible for the trust fund funding, that's where the bond anticipation note also helped cover some of those costs. Phase three, this is our main site. This is our operations facility, about a little over 100,000 square feet of total building space over 6 buildings. This is 6.2 acres. Our construction schedule, the contract has been executed. So they're in those beginning phases right now. So construction early 2025 to late 2026. Our estimated cost is about $50.1 million for that project. Our funding sources was 49% of the general fund and 51% of utility funds. We came up with that number by really taking a close look at several different factors of the operations facility. What the footprint was as far as which functions we're going to be using, which buildings, which storage areas, the number of FTEs in the building, square footage of the building, and came up with a proportionate share that really allocated out the function of the building to its component units. So the operations facility main site cost breakdown. Our construction contract through Forma was $37.5 million. We do have some ancillary work, service and streetlights through Puget Sound Energy, furnishings, fixtures, equipment, IT, security and technology. That's a big deal and it's a big number. You know, we want to be sure that our access control or intrusion control and our monitoring are really doing its job to safeguard the asset that is the operations facility, as well as the assets that are inside that facility. Construction management and administration have also been previously approved through council. City staff time, there is of course a staff time component to this, and then a construction contingency. Overall, our total anticipated cost of the project from feasibility through essentially move-in is 65.9, actually it's rounding up to $66 million. And again, I am so sorry. Thanks, Jeff. Oh. So general fund 49%, and you can see how this breaks out as far as fleet, parks, streets, police, facilities, and non-departmental all have a piece of that general fund portion. And then in our utility funds, water, sewer, and stormwater, the funding source for the utility funds is some utility fund balance, that those are funds that have been accrued over the years to help pay for this project, as well as the issuance of revenue debt, which is the second topic on our agenda this evening. The funding source for the general fund is proceeds from the Sumner Meadows Golf Course. That really has been kind of the linchpin for getting this project moving on to construction, is anticipating the closing of that sale, which was complete in 2024. The costs break out between 2017 and 2022. We had approximately $7.6 million in design costs. That was paid for out of local funds. So the general fund picked up a portion of that, as well as water, sewer, and storm. Phase one, this $4.3 million, this was our bond anticipation note. You'll see the two totals in there. One is to be paid out of the golf course proceeds. The other is through the long-term debt. And again, that's prorated out by the split of the governmental versus the utility. Phase two, the decant facility, the bulk of that is being paid by the Public Works Trust loan. And then the parts that are non-related to the decant facility paid out of the project funds. And then the contract for phase three, as well as the phase three facility and frontage, are proportioned out that 49.51% between a long-term debt issue for the utilities and use of proceeds of the Sumner Meadows Golf Course. Next steps, on February 18th, so that is a Tuesday because of the holiday, you're going to see two ordinances before you. The first is ordinance 2918, and that's our second agenda item this evening, and that's a delegation authority for issuing long-term debt in the form of a revenue bond. The second ordinance before you is 2920. This is an amendment to the 2025-2026 budget. And what that amendment does is out of Fund 004, that's our capital reserve fund, that is the repository of the proceeds from the golf course sale. We would transfer $2.1 million to Fund 200. That would be for debt service for the bond anticipation note. So the bond anticipation note will be paid off as part of this overall debt issuance. Also transfers $25.3 million from Fund 004, so that's out of the proceeds from the golf course sale, to Fund 325, that's our capital facilities fund for construction costs. In Fund 200, which is our debt service fund, it'll recognize the transfer in from Fund 004, as well as recognizing funding from the debt issuance for the utility portion of the bond anticipation note, and then paying off that bond anticipation note as part of the long-term debt issuance. And then for a capital facility, this is where we'll see the construction, recognizing the transfer from the Fund 004, recognizing revenue coming in from the issuance of long-term debt, and then programming the capital construction cost, the $50.875 million. That's a lot of information. Again, this is something that we have been talking about for years. It's something that we have been really kind of planning for. We've gone through several iterations of our design, really trying to value engineer it as well as we could. We're excited to see it start to come to fruition and start to see dirt being moved and buildings start to come out of the ground. I'm happy to answer any questions on this portion.
I have a question. Will it be fenced? Fenced in?
The facility itself, yes, it will be fenced on all sides.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Yeah, on the trust fund loan, so is that paid off when you're doing all this combining money, or is that, from the golf course money, or?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So the trust fund loan will actually have the debt service programmed into the utility rate model. The utility rate model has already accounted for the long-term debt issuances for the operations facility. So essentially what will happen, these have already been built into the rates. They're in our existing rate model. This stormwater utility will be paying the debt service over the next 20 years for the decant facility. Props to Public Works. They've done an excellent job with managing that project. The body of the agreement with the trust fund loan actually has some incentives in it. We're hoping that we can take advantage of one of those incentives to maybe even decrease our interest rate a bit. We'll see how that works out. But the debt service for the decant portion is built into the stormwater fund.
Okay. And then another question is, what's the difference between construction management and construction administration?
Mr. Costa, do you want to come up?
So just kind of basically, it's the main difference is, and I don't know if there's a specific place you're referring to where the language changed.
This is
I wanna
in
make sure
their
I'm answering your
detailed
question.
costs. Yeah, there, on the,
ABA and TCF.
So construction management, we have, sometimes it's all together. Here we've broken it out. KBA, which is the construction management firm, is going to be doing on-site day-to-day inspection of the project as it's being constructed. Whereas the construction administration by TCF is the more kind of overarching management of design questions, design concerns that come in. That's their piece of it. So it's on a project like this that's sometimes split out. And that's,
Okay.
if that makes any sense, there's the actual inspector day-to-day on the ground,
yeah,
and that is the KBA.
okay. All right, that helps. Thank you.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. In terms of the old space or current space being used for operations staff, and equipment and things like that, what will be made of that once the new facility is in operation?
That's a great question, and that's one that will be back before you, probably early next year. Obviously, we need to make some decisions about that before we vacate it. We haven't gotten it appraised. We'll probably need to update that since it's been several years since we did that. There are some unique challenges with that site because of how close it is to the White River. So it does have some limitations for future development, but that doesn't mean that it can't be used in its current state.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jason. And then lastly, in terms of the facility that we're constructing and putting together, where, in terms of the planning and the feasibility and all those things that went into it, does that get us, kind of getting up to speed on this stuff? Does that get us everything that we wanted? Are there some things we had to trim that we just said it's too much time, all those types of things? Like, does this really set us up for the long term, or are there still some desires that we didn't quite get?
It really does set us up for the long term. There was a lot of thought put into this, and it took a lot of coordination, not only with engineering staff, but really with our operations staff, the folks that are really going to be living in and using the facility, were instrumental to be in the design process. So we had a lot of stakeholder participation from that group. With that, they really identified the things that each one of our departments needed: water, sewer, storm. They really were able to define all of their spaces and get what they needed. Plan is this is to be a 50-year facility, hopefully longer than that as well. But it really was based on their needs, the way they currently operate, things they currently use, and the wants that they were able to understand and comprehend at the time. So.
Also say, Councilmember Kenna, that some of the later changes have been to accommodate like electric vehicle charging, since we know that that is still a priority of the state. So making sure that we have, the right size electrical service going in, the panels, the conduit, everything ready. So as our fleet electrifies, we're not chasing the infrastructure side of it, at least. The other thing is generators too, making sure that this is, can fully operate on a generator and not only operate the building, but also charge our electric fleet if we need to. So those are things that have been, added since the 2021 decision. And so that, I really am confident that this is a building that is going to be future-proof too for several decades to come.
So in some respects, that maybe that delay, even though costly in some respects, does give us a few other things that maybe sets it up for a longer term kind of win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
It really helped Public Works be able to sit with it and make sure that we understand it. The other thing that I haven't talked about yet really is the IT portion of it. Really, our IT department is expanding its kind of sphere of influence with cameras, with intrusion, with all of those devices, and that when they received this design, they had the appropriate amount of time to really look at where do we need door access cards, where do we, and the access key card readers, all of those things I feel like that's what we've done for the past year and a half, is look for all the little things that you might not really think about, or might not, the detailed work that we're really gonna benefit from that as we're moving into design, into construction.
And one other thing, Mayor, if I may, the way that the facility was designed, you know, we do have a little bit of ability. Let's say we get 30 years in and we need to add on. There are some buildings that we have designed that we can add on and extend those buildings for future growth if, heaven forbid, something changed, technology changes, right? Sometimes we need a little bit more room. Need to store a piece of equipment inside that we didn't used to have to store inside. So there's some good ways that we're thinking about this and planning for the future.
Councilmember Bowman.
So, that's where I was going, was you said hopefully 50 years. Based on your studies, what do you think the reality is, for full-time employees that need to be in there? I mean, the growth that we're expecting, where do you really think it's gonna kind of land at?
Well, that, we had planned for that level, you know, we didn't plan for today's staffing levels. We were planning for kind of that future staffing level. We had a staffing assessment that went out. Might have been 30 years. I'm not sure how far we went out with our staffing, but the rest of the facility is essentially, you know, a 50-year facility. We feel like we're in really good shape. We feel like the city is growing, but it's also growing to some of the extents. So, you know, we do expect additional growth. It's not as robust as maybe when the north end was really growing by leaps and bounds. So we feel like while we will probably grow somewhat, it's not, we're within an envelope of how much growth we're expecting. We don't see, you know, growth forever for.
So, I mean, I know this is kind of a crystal ball type of thing because you can only anticipate growth, but, you're feeling, what might be a circumstance that would cause to come back to ask for more money other than the potential adding on, or I'm sure you guys thought through all these things. Are you feeling real confident that pretty much covered everything, people wise, need wise, all that?
So when we built the staffing projections, it looked at, you know, what is our targeted employment growth, our residential growth, and not just people, right? But service connections are a real big thing when we're looking at water meters, for example. How much room do you need to service those and maintain those fleet vehicles? I think the big unknown is what could change at the state or federal level that we don't even know about today, right? They could say, well, now you need to do this type of service on water lines, or you need to do this type of street maintenance that we have no clue about right now. But that would be probably the worst case example of an unfunded mandate that we have to then accommodate the staff and the equipment to do that type of work. And that would push us beyond our planning envelope that Mr. Koza was talking about.
Great, thanks. That is kind of where I was going, you know, with the unexpected mandates. So, okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Councilmember Elfers.
Thanks. Yeah, hey, I was just curious. So you said feasibility was like 2017 to 2021. And so can you tell me a little bit about where were we at the end of that feasibility and where are we at today? Can you just help us understand, like, as far as did the facility change a lot? You mentioned a couple things with the charging station, so that those are helpful. But like the overall cost of the project, did that change a lot? Where was it then? Where is it now?
There's a couple things to take into consideration. First off, if you want to look at just the bare number, you know, 65 or 66 million, we're about 41, 21. Since then, we've added the north parcel, right? The decant facility. So that was an add. We also had to make some changes. We actually eliminated a building at one point in this facility due to the timing with the golf course sale and having to remove staff from a building that was on the golf course. And then that morphed kind of into having to temporarily relocate some of those services to the cemetery. And there's been some changes there. But if you want to look at just dollar to dollar, it's about 41 to 66. And there's been a lot of changes, obviously, in the construction market since 2021. Every project that we've done is considerably more than what it was in 2021. And Mr. Koza can talk about why that is, I'm sure, on materials. The cost of goods is a big one, and labor is the other one. You know, labor costs have continually gone up since 2021.
Yeah, so clearly there are the inflationary factors that we're all seeing in general construction as well. There are some pieces of this, I was just trying to look back and see what was missing, because I believe that 41 originally was more total construction costs, right?
Yeah.
It didn't really have a lot of our soft costs in there as well, which clearly there is soft costs associated with, the instruction administration and the design.
IT.
And the IT. So there are pieces of the puzzle that are not comparable from 41 to 66. And I think 41 included the land, but I'd have to go back and look for sure. So there are, it's not apples to apples there, but the nice thing about the number that we're coming with today is that this is the all-in number, and it's also the number that was with all the chips on the table. We have everything signed up at this point, so we're not expected to see any more increases. There's always the potential for a change order, but we're not looking at adding tens of millions of dollars at this point. It really is what it is. So that's the benefit. Once you've gotten through the entire design process, you really know what you're looking at. I believe there wasn't any equipment also in the new facility. But there's literal adds of things that were not in the original estimate that are now fully encapsulated in this one.
Okay. And then on those items that we haven't approved already, so the PSE, furnishings, fixtures, IT, is that something that Forma is gonna supervise and be a part of? Is it city is gonna, staff is gonna do it, or who's in charge of that, since we already signed the contract with the construction contract?
So the furnishing, fixtures and equipment likely going to be off of a state contract. That is something that the city was planning on, the city owner furnished, owner supplied, and owner installed for the majority of, for that line item. IT, we are our IT department's working with I think it's Security Solutions Northwest to do all of the contracting to do that work. So while it's there and it says it's not been approved, we have very solid mechanisms for how we're going to get there.
Okay.
Be a state contract. So
Yep.
Security Solutions Northwest
Correct.
is a cooperative purchasing agreement through the state. And they're doing all the current infrastructure upgrades here at City Hall, the wastewater treatment
Okay, so we're
facility.
kind of tying them together.
Exactly, because we want it all
It's all
to
gonna
talk
be
to
the
each
same
other
There's
and work well.
consistency.
And not have two contractors potentially
Yeah.
pointing the finger at each other, one provider.
And then PSE, the service and streetlights, that's just something that typically we contract directly with PSE. The city and it just does it directly with PSE. It's just the easiest way because they use their contractors to do the actual work there. So it's a direct contract between us and PSE.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Pat, you good?
Yeah. So what is design/ROW? I always know ROW is right away.
Right away.
Oh, so that's the purchase
So-
of the property?
Right of way / land acquisition.
Okay.
Yes.
Usually,
Okay.
we're almost always buying land for right of way purchase, but this was more of a land acquisition, so it'd be.
Okay, that's, I just,
An app-
because it was a large number, so I just, okay, cool. And then also just to help Councilman Kenna is that I was at the shop when this all come down, and so it was really nice to have upstairs, what we call upstairs. Every individual person at the shop had their input, the parks was included, and so it was a long process. And we did start very large and come down to what's needed, and then we went. Again, I'm sure it's changed since I left. But it's really nice, thank you.
All right, anybody else?
Have one more.
One more, and
And this is just, I just was looking at this, so in 2000, I've just looked it up, it says the city's population was 8,000 people. And we had 13 FTEs in the public works, it sounds like, in the operation, so. Our population's gone up 30%, so I'm just trying to figure out but our staffing's gone up almost triple, and I'm assuming some of that's because of the additional warehouses, so not necessarily population driven, maybe more employment driven. Just curious, do you happen to remember what we're projecting? Because our population is, I'm looking at I'm guessing we're going up 20% in the next 15 years, I'm guessing, something like that. So is it gonna go similarly from 37 to 100? Or because it's a pretty big drastic change, but I think it's different than just population.
I don't have the numbers, but I don't think Michael does.
1,900 housing starts, right? Was
Oh,
the
you're
number that
talking
we're
housing or
comparing.
how many, you're asking about how many employees you think we'll have? I don't have those numbers, but we can certainly get them for you, what the building was based off, but I can tell you it's not the same growth that we experienced from 2000 to 2020. Simply because we're much more built out. You look at, the city changed a lot from 2000 to 2020 with our industrial
Yeah,
center
that's kinda-
coming online.
Yeah, I was just curious, and
Yeah.
it's not super important. I was trying to surprise you with questions tonight, but that was one I
Thank you,
looked at.
not a surprise.
That's good, thank you.
But even just thinking about, 1,900 housing starts, it's 2.5 people per household, that's like 5,000 people. So in theory, we're gonna grow from about 11,000 to about 16,000 people, if you believe the state estimates. That's a lot, that's a pretty significant, and they all need water and sewer. And the one thing that we didn't talk about was the increased regulation in that time period. The stormwater department wasn't really a thing in 2000. We might have been, I think, we had created one, but we were definitely kind of on the edge, on the leading edge of what stormwater was all about. And now there are all these regulations, all these requirements for us to be constantly bucking out catch basins and doing maintenance. Not that we shouldn't have been doing maintenance already, but there's a lot more maintenance that has to be done if to follow all the state regulations nowadays. And that makes a huge difference. And that means that it shaped our workforce. It made a big change in the last 20 years.
So that ties into Councilmember Bowman's question about like if there's additional regulations on monitoring things and doing things, that would probably be the one unknown if this facility. Okay.
I think another good example to both of your points, we're building a almost 200-acre habitat project. That thing is going to require ongoing regular maintenance for at least 10 years and probably the rest of its existence. And that's something that we're working with our partners at Pierce County because it is in the flood control zone district. We're hopeful that they'll be helping us with that maintenance, but they may not. It might be on the city to maintain that forever. So that's another good example of staffing and regulations are going to continue to ratchet up those staffing numbers more than anything else.
Okay. Everybody good? Alright. Moving on, ordinance number 2918, delegation authority 2025 revenue bonds, Public Works Operations Facility. I call on Chief Financial Officer Cassandra Raymond and Senior VP Public Finance Dave Tregesser of DA Davidson and Company. Oh, you have a long tag there.
We can shorten it.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So very happy to have Mr. Tregesser here. He has worked with the city for probably more years than either one of us really cared to admit. We've relied on him for a very long time to provide really sound, good financial advice on how we issue debt and on that process, whether it be a full-on debt issue or a private placement. We are really excited. The second part of this project, so we have the governmental portion that's being funded from proceeds from the golf course, but then we're going to be issuing water sewer revenue debt for the utility portion of the operations facility. This will be the first time since I believe 2008 that we have done a full-on debt issuance. We did it in 2008. We refunded that debt in 2018, but it's been quite some time since we've gone through this process. So we've done a couple of private placements in the interim, again, helped by Mr. Tregesser. But this process will be a debt issuance on the open market. And we've asked Mr. Tregesser to come and give a brief presentation on what that looks like. We will be coming to you on the 18th with a delegation ordinance. That ordinance will essentially delegate to staff the responsibility and the authority to settle the final structure of the proposed debt issuance under a very specific set of parameters. And we'll go over those as part of the presentation.
Thank you, Cassandra. Jason, Council, pleasure to be here again. I was asked to come tonight and give you just a brief update of the tax-exempt bond market, and then talk a little bit about our process going forward that Cassandra just mentioned. So when I was here last time, I showed you some of these graphs But the first one here is one of our bond buyer index. This is a composite of high grade, highly rated municipal bonds. This is a 20-year history of this market. So you can see the ups and downs of what's been going on in the tax-exempt bond market. You can see the lows there, the all-time lows in our market during the pandemic, during the number of years there, 2020 through 2023. And the market after that yields have come up just like all interest rates, and now we're more like our 20-year average of municipal bonds. What we do in our market is we break that down by maturity of bonds. You'll be going out with a long-term fixed rate bond issue. We'll be talking about the parameter, the length of term of that financing. In the numbers, we looked at a 25-year fixed rate financing. So the top graph shows municipal AAA rates, and AAA is the highest rated in the market, what they've done over the last 10 years. And so that graph would be kind of representative of your borrowing costs because you're doing long-term fixed rate bonds. You can see it's been pretty level over the last year or so. This graph only goes through January 27th. So in the last week and a half, our yields have actually come down a little bit in our market. But please keep in mind, as we go through this financing, you will not be issuing the bonds under our current schedule until April. And so the interest rates won't be locked in until that period of time. We'll be doing a lot of work in the meantime, getting ready for that. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's our current timeline. There are a lot of numbers on this page. I just wanted to point out a few. This is what we call the sources and uses of funds. And we have columns for what we call the new money portion, the amount that we deposit to your project fund based on Cassandra's preliminary numbers of about 25.56 million. You'll see that in yellow. And then we're going to be paying off the 2023 LTGO ban we talked about. And we're using about half the proceeds as mentioned from the golf course. It's noted there in the other sources, golf course contribution. And then we're going to be financing the other 49% in this bond issue. You'll see some column under other uses. It says refunding escrow deposits. So we're required to give 30 days notice to the current holder of the ban, which is Webster Bank. And so we put those proceeds in escrow for 30 days. And we buy what we call our slugs, state and local government securities. Those are treasury securities to pay off that ban after the Webster Bank's been given that notice. So that's our kind of sources and uses of funds. Our preliminary debt service schedule, again, based on estimated interest rates today, and this is a 25-year fixed rate financing. We have a lower payment starting in calendar year 25, and then level debt service payments about $1.85 million each year through 2049. This will, of course, change. When we ran the numbers, we had what we call an estimated true interest cost, as noted at the bottom there, of 4.26. That's kind of a blended rate of the bonds when they're sold. Our schedule. As Sandra mentioned, these are bonds that will be sold at the public market because of your high expected credit quality of this issue, your credit rating, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the long-term fixed rate nature of these bonds. It makes economic sense to sell them in the public bond markets to get the lowest borrowing cost. And so that's what we're doing. There's a little more work involved in that compared to the private placements that we did over the last number of years, which are small financings placed with a financial institution that can be done very quickly. And those are paid off very quickly, as we've talked about. So we'll be coming back to council for your consideration of the delegation bond ordinance on the 18th, next Tuesday. And that is the only action item the council needs to take for this transaction. It delegates all authority to the mayor and staff to complete the financing, subject to the parameters that are in the bond ordinance. We then go through a process of getting ready to go to Standard & Poor's, a rating agency, to get an independent third-party review of the city's credit. We put together a disclosure document for bond investors. That's called a preliminary official statement. Get to a position on the calendar you see there that we review market conditions in early April, April 9th. We actually price bonds, which means we finalize the interest rates on the bonds on that day in the morning, and enter into a bond purchase agreement with the city to finalize that. And then 2 weeks later, the bonds are closed, which means as underwriter, we wire transfer to the city the bond proceeds and pay off Webster Bank for the LTGO ban and pay off other cost of issuance. So you have that $25.569 million to invest for your project over the life of those proceeds. Cassandra mentioned the parameters that are in the ordinance to be considered. We've listed the ones currently here. There are about 6 of them. They're listed. Maximum aggregate principal amount no greater than $29 million. We're sizing that less than that right now. Final maturity no more than 30 years. As I mentioned, we've been running the bonds at pro forma of 25 years. Maximum interest rate on any of the bonds at 6%, maximum true interest cost at 6%. Again, those are conservative numbers. I mentioned the true interest cost is less than 4.5% currently. So this just gives the flexibility if the market moves or we decide to delay the financing for whatever reason. The authority is granted to the quote city representative, which is defined as the mayor, city administrator, deputy city administrator, and CFO. And the authority is under the ordinance is granted for a 1-year period. We fully expect to be ahead of that and price bonds in April, but if there was some market disruption, some unknown event, we have the ability to delay the financing and close it at a different period of time. Hopefully not. Yes.
Why is it February 1st instead of April?
Yeah, I could, that's the date that I put in there. I think, let's look at the actual amount in the ordinance, whether it does say 1 year from the closing date or put a different date on there.
So it's just
Kind of look. I think I just put February 1st because we were moving down that path. But it's typically 1 year from the closing date. So if we
Okay.
close in April, it would be
year
1 year from that date. But again, we fully expect to price bonds unless there's a material change in the market in April and
Okay.
lock in interest rates.
Okay, thank you.
Question? Yes.
I was looking at your numbers for the interest rates and I see that we put a max of 6%. But I'm looking at the interest rates. Nothing in here shows that anything's ever historically been at 6%. So I'm looking at the 10-year, 20-year and 1 year
Right.
maturity average. And so do you think we need to go as high as 6? It looks like that was one time in 2009 when the market was really
You know
bad.
what? That's a good question. Granted, historical rates have not been that high. Granted, you're an excellent credit. We've just assumed that you're gonna get at least a AA rating on the bonds when we go to the market. You know, we do have some uncertainty with our federal partners. There have been waves and things, and you may have read about this, that they have threatened to take away the tax exemption of certain bonds with the Tax Reform Act that they're considering, which would extend the tax cuts for corporations and other people, but it could also affect municipal bonds. We certainly hope not. And if they do, we hope that it doesn't really affect what we call governmental bonds, which are bonds like this, which are full governmental projects, water, sewer, there are certain tax exempt bonds are what we call private activity bonds, has to do with an issue I was talking about with the council member earlier, where some of the proceeds are used for a for-profit corporation. And they're talking about taking away the tax exemption of maybe some of those, like sports facilities. Some of those are issued with tax exempt bonds. But in the worst case, they decide to change the tax law and take away our the tax exemption. That's going to materially affect your borrowing cost. We hope we'll close the issue before any of that occurs.
Right.
So if something happens and it's 6.5%, then you just have to come back to us and we just say.
Exactly.
Yes.
If, say, for example, worst case scenario, inflation takes off, interest rates go way up. They change the tax exemption. We can't sell bonds at 6%. We just have to come back to you to get authority to change the parameter.
One more question. I'm just curious, and when do you start paying interest on the bond? So you get approval, I looked at your schedule, so you said you bond closing April 24th.
Yeah.
On a normal construction bond, like a construction loan, you would kind of do loan draws and you pay interest as you have the loan, so you pay a lot less interest. Is this something where you get the 25 or the whole bond approved and you have to sit it and you pay interest on the whole thing right away? Or
It
can you
is.
draw on it as you do
It
your
is, and
project?
that's normal for the tax exempt bond market. Because we're locking in the total borrowing cost on what you call drawdown bonds, short-term financing drawdown bonds. Those are typically done on a drawdown schedule. And then you pay it off, but you're not locking in the interest rate. We're assuming that you want to lock in the interest rate, lock in the debt service payments. You will get the proceeds, that $25 million, you'll be able to invest those. And currently the LGIP has yields greater than 4.26%. So you're actually, we'll be talking about some of the rules of the federal government that's in the bond ordinance. But you'll be able to, under current thoughts, you should be able at least to make as much money as you're paying interest on the bonds during that construction
So it's
period.
not,
you draw
that's
down.
kind of over.
Does that make
over-
sense?
Yep, that makes sense, thank you.
Yeah, good question, though.
Anybody else? Oh, that you good? All right.
Great. Thank you very much. So we will be back before you on the 18th with both the ordinance amending the 25-26 budget as well as the delegation ordinance for the debt issue. So it's exciting.
All right. City administrator report.
Nothing tonight.
Nothing tonight. Any council meeting agenda changes for anybody? We good? Are we all good?
But this
Right.
month, in March, public safety may need to change because of going to the legislature on the 19th.
Okay,
We'll see what time we end up going to Olympia and figure that out.
Yeah, but that's, I just noticed when I was flying on my calendar.
all right. Any committee issues? Any of you? No? No? All right, no executive session tonight? All right, I will adjourn this meeting at 6:47 PM.